Okay, first of all, thanks for inviting me to join this session. It is our global conference week. We had a session yesterday hosted by Taiwan, and today we have this session hosted by Thailand. And thank you for Adam setting the scene, talking about globally the recent developments on social impact management. Friends from Social Value Thailand, they just mentioned 3 years ago, we conducted the first SRI training in Bangkok, and it's so amazing to see that so much has have happened in Thailand. And I learned that practitioners and academics, they're working to produce SRI reports and trying to up the game and let people know about what social impact and social value have been created. And maybe I should talk a little bit about during the pandemic, how we could continue to create value during the difficult times. So while in Thailand, you are working on to produce the SR report, in a sense, you are still talking about reporting, right? But when we face with some crisis, faced with the pandemic, actually we need to actively manage our impact. We cannot just wait. During the pandemic, we still need to deliver our promise to create value for the underprivileged, for our clients, for our students. So when in Hong Kong, when we talk about what should we do in face of the COVID-19, lots of things were disrupted. I will talk to the operators in Hong Kong in some sharing session. We should continue to make use of the impact framework to guide our decision making. So Adam mentioned about the impact management project, which has this model that covers the 5 dimensions of impact. When we do our SRI analysis or do the impact analysis, we mostly would not explicitly talk about risk. But in this presentation, I would like to focus more on how we could focus on the risk assessment so that we could better manage our operation and to make sure we deliver the social impact of our project. So very often when I talk to, say, the impact investors, they would readily understand when you talk about financial investment, you will talk about simultaneously the return and the risk. So if you put some money in the bank, it is a low return, but it is also very low risk. And if you buy shares in the stock market, it is high return, but you need to take more risk. In the space of social impact, all the social enterprise and then all the investors or government funders, they always want to get more social impact and social value, but rarely they will talk about impact risk. But actually, it is very important when we talk about social return, we also need to talk about impact risk. So impact risk, you could understand impact risk as the risk that the expected outcome, social outcome, would not realize. That is the social impact risk. And all of us will, all the operator, they will do something like this to create the theory of change, right? We have the input, activities, outputs, and outcome, right? And this is a risk model that combined with the theory of change. So we have some external risk. We call it PEST. It's the short form for political, economic, social, and technological factors. That are some external risks that affect our project. So I would say COVID-19, the pandemic, is also an external risk that affect our operation. So under a pandemic, is it true that our theory of change is still failed? That's a big question during the pandemic. In a normal time, you can deliver your service using your existing theory of change. But during the pandemic, there might be a lot of scenarios that you could not follow your normal program. Under the pandemic, your normal program delivery will be disrupted. You may need to modify ways to deliver your services. Maybe you need to use, if you are doing a counseling service, you can't do face-to-face counseling. You might need to do online counseling. And then you need to think about, if you're an operator, you need to think about reallocating your resources, maybe to redeploy your staff, your human resources, etc., etc. You need to ration the service provision. And then there are some unforeseen changes in our language. It is a new outcomes that might happen and might experienced by the service users. So if the students can't go back to schools to attend classes, they need to stay at home to use online channel to join classes. What would be the new outcome that might be experienced by the students? How about the more wealthy student compared to the average class students? Okay, so we need to think about new service segments under the new scenarios. Okay, so at the same time, we are not operating on our own. There are other operators and government or other parties might do a lot of things during the pandemic. And as we continue to deliver our program, we need to make sure the things we do had to complement and had to have some sort of coordination with some other efforts. So these are all the scenarios that are under the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are talking about the situation in the past year, but as an operator, you need to think beyond the current time, and you need to think about how about the next year and the coming years. So I think we all know there are lingering uncertainties in the coming years. And then COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier, it is an unforeseen external risk. So we need to go back to this framework to analyze all this risk. And COVID is an external risk, but the SRI framework and the IMP framework also talk about there are other risks that we could manage, we could try to identify, and we should try to minimize, and we should try to mitigate. So for example, one of the risks is the execution risk. So right now, as an example, we are using the Zoom conference to organize this discussion. We are trying to execute this thing. So other than doing a face-to-face conference, we are doing the online conference. So if we have some technological issue or internet issue, we might not be able to execute this thing. And this is a risk. Okay, so like say for the schools, they can't go back to school to run the classes. So how could we execute some alternative way to run the classes? So we need to make sure the new way to run the classes, we need to make sure we could deliver the original outcome we want to deliver. And then in relation to outcome risk, there are lots of categories under outcome risk. I mentioned earlier, there might be some new outcome. I think in Hong Kong and also in the UK, it has been reported that domestic violence has increased because of COVID and because of the home stay, that the family member had to stay at home. And then there's possible that domestic violence, some kind of fighting might happen. And these are externalities that otherwise won't be that severe during normal time. So we need to address externalities, and in SROI, we have that component built in our framework. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we need to think about segmentation. Using the example about on students attending classes. In the case of Hong Kong, many students will stay home and then they will use an online platform to attend classes. But we have different categories of students. Some students are more well off. It is quite easy for them to use the internet and then to join the classes. But then we have the low income family students, and then they're actually quite different. So in the case of segmentation, of course, we said we try to provide them with some assistance, and then so that they could better accommodate the new scenario. But we need to make sure we are not just addressing to the needs of the average student. We need to address the needs of different categories of students. So we want to make sure the students who are below average could be given more assistance. Okay? And then, of course, in SROI, we also talk about additionality, things that would happen anyway. And also, this is difficult, but as we continue to adjust our program to cope with the pandemic, we need to collect timely evidence so that we could make course changes very, very quickly. So these are the examples and the summary of what I've just mentioned. So in the COVID-19 scenario, we need to modify service delivery and ration service provision. So we need to address the execution risks. When we change the program, we need to make sure the new theory of change or the adjusted theory of change has to be a failure theory of change. And then in addressing externality risk, there are unforeseen outcome experienced by service users. So we need to keep close contact with the stakeholders and learn what are the new changes experienced by them. And then we need to manage the segmentation risk, learn about, we have different categories, stakeholders who would have different, who would be impacted differently during the pandemic. And then we want to make sure the intervention will not be duplicated. Government will do something, maybe some churches might do something, and then other parties will do something. And as a service operator, how we could make sure cope with all the other operator, and then try not to duplicate the effort. And finally, we have the evidence risk. We need to collect the timely evidence to support the decision making. So all in all, this is an example that we could actually actively using the both the IMP framework and the SRI principles to guide the day-to-day operation of of the service organizations. And we should not wait 1 year later or 2 years later and then to start calculating the SRI and do a report. We need to help the stakeholders, help the beneficiary as soon as possible. So very briefly, I introduced the risk dimension of the impact management framework, and then there are different categories of risks. So I only mentioned a few that I think that are most relevant in the pandemic situation, but there are actually, in the IMP framework, they identified 9 categories of impact risk, but I won't go over them one by one. And then there are different tables and templates we can use to try to manage those risks. So, but to conclude, the important message is, as Adam and also Bao has discussed earlier, we need to move beyond measurement to management, right? So using the risk perspective to manage our activities, I think it is really, really important, really, really relevant during the time of the COVID-19. And it is actually a very good opportunity for the operator to put these tools into practice and try to manage the activities to increase or to maximize the impact to the beneficiaries. I will end my presentation here.
Wow, thank you so much, Terence. You are waking up, waking us up, not just only SRI report as a end of the process, but actually it's very, very useful to use as an execution and also manage your risks. How can we manage unintended and negative impact that might occur during your operation, and how can we review your intervention or review your operation to still get the target as same as financial target, but we like to achieve also social impact target, right?
Yeah.
So how you in terms of finance?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting point that I never thought before about how to apply the SRI with risk management. And I think it's very helpful for organization that they not only calculate the SRI for the interpretation or just the number, but they can apply to the execution in terms of risk management that can improve the project or the performance of the organization. I think this is very interesting and very useful tools for when we apply the SRI.
Yes, to CEO, to the leader of the organization to reconsider